Hey, folks. So I'm here with Paul Larudee. And Paul Larudee is quite an amazing figure. I don't quite know where to begin. I mean, he's a Renaissance man. Paul, tell us about yourself. I understand you got a degree in linguistics, a PhD. You're a very skilled piano tuner. I first met you when you were reporting back from a delegation that you led to Syria, the Syrian Arab Republic, for the elections. I remember that when you had an event at the UN church to describe it. You've done so much work in the Middle East. You've given special attention to the Palestine issue. Tell the viewers about yourself, Paul. It's really an honor to have you on.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm not a youngster. I'm 74 years old, and my first contact with Palestine was in 1965 when my father was working in Jordan, and I was studying at the time in France, and I went to visit him. And I got a considerable education, as many people do when they visit that area. And there was a Palestinian student of my father who basically became like a brother, a second child to my father, in the sense that he really wanted to make him part of the family and to sponsor him to go for a PhD, which he did at Georgetown University in Middle Eastern history. And I was his roommate while he was there, and I got my degree a few years later than him in linguistics, also from Georgetown. But anyway, along the way I kept getting educated more and more about what's happening. And I'm not sure what else to tell. I love being a piano technician, if for no other reason that it gives me a huge amount of independence. I don't have to report to a boss. I'm not accountable to anybody, and I can speak my mind. The only thing I have to worry about is being killed or imprisoned, and I'm willing to live with that.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds like a good deal. Now, you are based in the Bay Area, and on our YouTube videos here on this channel, we talked a lot about a certain political figure by the name of Kamala Harris. And I view her as potentially the most dangerous politician in Washington right now, particularly her criminal record, the strange things she said about left-wing activists, making fun of them, her record of trying to keep people locked up and, locking up all kinds of people for smoking marijuana and then joking about it herself. But you seem to have a lot of experience with Kamala because she comes out of the Bay Area. She's from Berkeley. And you seem to be well aware of her ties to Israel. Can you tell us about what you know about Kamala going back these years? What's the story there?
Well, I don't want to exaggerate what I know about Kamala, because as soon as I found out a little bit, I really didn't want to know much more. And didn't want to have much to do with her. But you can't avoid hearing about her, and it's important to know who she is. And I'm glad you're undertaking this. But my first contact with her was when she was the district attorney for the city of San Francisco, and that was basically the beginnings of her career. And I and some other prominent figures, I won't consider myself prominent, but they were prominent in the Bay Area, discovered that she had just returned from a week's trip to Israel, which, we've seen it 1,000 times, and thousands of people have made this trip to Israel. So who makes the trip to Israel? When it's the district attorney of a city, and even at lower levels, it says this person is somebody that the Israel Lobby, the Zionist organization, considers to be prominent and promising. And so we decided to have a meeting with her, if nothing else, just so that she could consider, we didn't know her very well at the time, consider the other side of the picture, the Palestinians and that sort of thing. So she agreed to a meeting, and 5 of us went, and one of my colleagues there on the committee said, "Well, you know what this was?" After we left, this was, she gave them a week, 24 hours a day of access to her, and just to show that she's reasonable and fair, she gave us half an hour.
Wow.
And
Well, let me interrupt you just there. Now, this is when she was the district attorney. This is when she
right.
had the practice that she brags about of locking up the parents of truant children. I mean, she's on tape kind of laughing about the fact that if children didn't go to school, she locked up the parents as if that would help. I mean, we know kids need to be in school, but I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, it's bad enough for low-income parents, low-income families, put the parents in jail. So she goes to Israel for a week. For a whole week, she goes to Israel, just a local district attorney. She goes to Israel for a week, and then she comes back and she meets with you and other activists for a half hour. What went on in that meeting? What was she like? What did she say to you? What did you say to her?
Basically, she said essentially nothing. She just sat there and listened. And we asked if she had questions. She had none.
Wow.
We asked her questions, and her answers were very non-committal and extremely short. So it was clear that she didn't want to be in that meeting, but she felt that for her credibility, she should meet with us. So
now,
that was.
Is there a Muslim American community in the Bay Area?
Oh, yes.
And how has she interacted with them? Because I know at this point, we see with the rise of Ilhan Omar and other figures, the Muslim American constituency is very important to the Democratic Party. What was her relationship with the Muslim American community in the Bay Area?
I wish I could tell you. I know the people who can give you that answer, mainly from CARE. They would know better than anybody else. And Zahra Bilu would be definitely up to date on this. I am not. I think there was, what shall I say, a sort of modus vivendi between them, and that. But I do know that the Muslim community was very concerned with what they considered to be abuses, and I would agree with them. Abuses in terms of violating the civil rights of Muslims. So, but the extent to which that was the case, I really can't testify to very much.
Now, she published this memoir, this kind of autobiography before her campaign, in which she presents the image that as district attorney, she was fighting for the rights of the low-income people, and she was disgusted. Was that your experience of her career as district attorney? I mean, did she have that kind of reputation?
Not exactly. She was and is dedicated to real traditional law and order, which is essentially bashing heads and using extreme force in order to get it done. And threats. I mean, threats using some people as examples, for example, in order to intimidate others. But that's a normal part of law enforcement, isn't it? And she didn't have much experience in law enforcement, and she wanted to show that she was on the side of the police.
Well, what I'm curious about, back to her trip to Israel and stuff. Can you talk about these trips that politicians take to Israel and the kind of thing that goes on? I mean, you mentioned that they gave her 5 days, all day. But what do they show the politicians there? What do they tell them? What kind of offers are made to them? What goes on these trips?
Well, it's not so much the trips, although the trips are definitely propaganda and they're junkets. They wine and dine them, best hotels, all this sort of thing. But well before that, they approached them, and this happened recently to one of the supervisors in our county, Contra Costa County, who is a skilled politician and actually one of the better ones in the area. But they pick out these people who look like they're articulate, they're smart, they are are ready to play the game, and they go to them and they say, look, we like you. We want to see you go places because we think that you have a lot of promise. Mm-hmm. And we're in a position to make that happen. We can help with funding. We can help with contacts. We can help with volunteers. We've got thousands of volunteers that can help you, for example, with a campaign or something. We are, they won't say this, but we are kingmakers. Mm-hmm. And we're professionals at it. We're as good as anybody in promoting political careers of people. If you want to go somewhere, we will work with you, we will help you, and we will get you places. I can't remember honestly right now whether Barack Obama was one of those, but the typical road is that they spend only 1 or 2 terms at each level of their career, so that that was the case for being district attorney of San Francisco, then attorney general of California, then senator from California, which is where she is now. And who knows, vice president, eventually president. This is all managed. Managed by whom? By the Israel lobby.
Well, let me ask you, Cynthia McKinney, she said that when she was first in Congress, they asked her to sign an oath of loyalty to Israel. Do we have any evidence that Kamala has made such a similar declaration? As she signed such an oath or something?
I can't imagine that she hasn't, because basically everybody does, as Cynthia has said. And I'm sure she has no objection to doing that. It's a Faustian arrangement, and she finds Faust to be very amenable to her goals.
A deal with the devil, I guess, to reference Goethe's classic.
Right.
Well, let me also ask you about this, because it seems like Trump is very close to Sheldon Adelson and Netanyahu, and it seems like there's almost a divide within the Israel lobby right now between the Likudniks and the Haganah crowd. Do you think that that's going on here, that maybe Kamala is close to the Israeli Labor Party, whereas Trump is close to Likud? Or do you think it's not that simple? Is this all a shell game? What do you make of all of this?
Well, you and I know, and most of your audience knows, that the difference between the Republican and Democratic parties is paper thin in so many ways. Right. And the Israel lobby doesn't discriminate. They cultivate ties on both sides of the aisle, and very successfully. So, Sheldon Adelson is active in one area. That's his business, but he doesn't constitute the whole lobby. And that's so I don't think it's about warfare between the various sides. It's about making sure that the United States complies with whatever Israel has in mind.
Now, we saw Netanyahu brought to the U.S. Congress to attack Obama during the Iran nuclear deal and that whole thing. And Trump has since ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. He's assassinated the top Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani. He has imposed more sanctions, and basically just there will never be again an Iranian nuclear deal, But I'm curious where Kamala stood on that, because I know that when Netanyahu came to the USA to attack Obama, that there were a number of Israeli generals who urged Netanyahu not to do that, and that was viewed as a controversial move in Israeli politics, even though many of the Democrats here in the United States embraced Netanyahu for doing that. Chuck Schumer was right up front. He voted against the nuclear deal. He was there applauding for Netanyahu on the floor of Congress. Bernie Sanders, however, was not, right? And Bernie Sanders seems to be on the outs with the Israel lobby, even though he's made many pro-Israel statements in the past. So where does Kamala fit into all of this, where it seems like even among the pro-Israel camp, there is some confusion, right?
I'm not sure about the confusion in the pro-Israel camp, but Kamala does not want to cause any difficulties or bad feelings between her and the Israel lobby or the government of Israel. So she's not going, that's not where she's going to ruffle any feathers, if she does ruffle any feathers at all. And she has. I mean, she's made some statements that anger African Americans in this country and others who are concerned about the abuses of the police. But she doesn't have to worry about those because she's covered by the Israel lobby, which will defend her or come what may.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's an interview where George Stephanopoulos asks her if she wants to defund the police. And you should just see the look of, like, she's like a deer in the headlights, you know, like, oh, you know, she doesn't have an answer to that because she knows what the public wants right now based on these mass demonstrations. And she knows where her bread is buttered, and she doesn't want to defund the police. And what's interesting is it's not just prosecutors like her, but a number of American police departments are trained in Israel. Right. I mean, these chokeholds that they know how to do, these weapons that they use, a lot of that comes from, operations where you have American police and Israeli police, teaming up and learning how to do it. I believe I saw a presentation at a conference years ago where someone said Israel's like the Harvard of police brutality. I mean, it's a place that people from all over the world go and learn to be brutal. Can you talk about that some?
Yeah, well, American police have always been fairly brutal because of the kind of military mentality and the gun culture in the U.S. But it's gone way beyond that now. And if American police are learning from Israelis, what do Israelis have to teach them? From the Israeli point of view, they're dealing with the enemy, namely the Palestinians. And their policing techniques are designed to deal with the enemy. Okay, so that's what our police are learning, to deal with the enemy, which when they come back here is us. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, beyond that, a lot of the recruits into the police come from the American military, where soldiers are learned, just like Israeli soldiers, to deal with the enemy. Well, what do you think? What do you think the police culture is in policing? It's to deal with the enemy, and we're all the enemy, but especially those who don't have the same color skin or the same cultural things, and those who are the poor, whom they can abuse as much as they want to without fear of retribution. So,
well, what's interesting, about if you look at Barack Obama, right? His mother is a white American. His father is from Kenya, not a descendant of African slaves, but from Kenya. If you look at Kamala, similar story, right? Her mother's from India. Her father is from Jamaica, right? And it seems like a lot of these figures who kind of become selected to lead the Black community in the United States by the American political establishment, they seem to not actually be descendants of slaves. They seem to be people that have dark skin and are African perhaps, but are not actually from the what you might call the Black nation of the United States. The people brought here in chains from the South, moved up during the Northern migration and stuff. It's an interesting pattern. I mean, it's almost like the leaders of this country wouldn't really trust an actual descendant of slaves in the position of president or U.S. senator or something like that. I'm also curious. What do you make of the fact that?
Well, let me interrupt for just a moment. It seems, however, that their connection with the Israel lobby means that they're anxious to become slaves.
Well, that's one way of putting it. Well, let me ask you what do you make of Tulsi Gabbard and Kamala's rivalry? Because it seemed like there was that debate. They didn't give Tulsi Gabbard very much time because she was considered to be anti-war and quote unquote fringe. But in the little bit of time they gave her, she just went right after Kamala, exposing that record, all of that, and it was a great service because that knocked her out of the polls. I mean, as soon as that happened, it was like Kamala just went down. And so then they had Kamala on CNN to talk about it. And they're like, what do you make of all these allegations? And she said, Tulsi Gabbard works for Assad. As if that changes anything, right? I mean, and so what do you make of it? Why does Tulsi Gabbard feel that Kamala was such a threat? And then why did Kamala respond with, "Oh, she works for Assad"? I mean, what's going on there? I mean, are there different factions behind the scenes? What was this about?
Well, clearly, Kamala didn't want to talk about this. And so she found a way to be dismissive about all of it. But the injection into political discussion of someone who has integrity and speaks truth and reason, like Tulsi Gabbard. We may disagree with some of the things she says, but she holds her own in terms of fact and logic, and she points out things that she's not supposed to point out, and which is why she didn't get a fair deal in any of the debates. But yes, I think choosing Kamala is because she smelled out that Kamala is a danger to the whole system, just like the other dangers that Tulsi pointed out. She did us a service.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard is active duty U.S. military. And when I saw her campaign rising, I immediately thought of something that happened to me in 2013 when Obama was on the brink of sending missiles to Syria. I was marching in Washington, D.C. with a small group of protesters, Syrian Americans, leftists and others, were marching, opposing the bombing. And a woman walked up to the protest and kind of took me aside. And the woman was in a suit. And I remember she said to me, I agree with you. I said, really? And she said, yeah. And she said, I'm an Arab translator for the FBI. And I know who it is that we're supporting in Syria right now. I translate what they say. We're supporting al-Qaeda. We're supporting the terrorists. And she said, I don't agree with any of your leftist crap or whatever, but I am with you on this. And it occurred to me that behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. and up within the Pentagon, there probably are a lot of people that don't like U.S. policy right now. And maybe they joined up because they wanted to protect Americans from al-Qaeda and from terrorism. But now they realize that in the Middle East, we're not fighting al-Qaeda, we're fighting al-Qaeda's enemy. Right? We overthrew Saddam Hussein, an enemy of al-Qaeda. We're going after Iran, an enemy of al-Qaeda. We waged war against the Syrian Arab Republic, another enemy of al-Qaeda. New sanctions imposed just today. Gaddafi even offered to torture al-Qaeda people for us. We overthrew him. But we're real close with the Saudis, who've got ties to al-Qaeda like you wouldn't believe. And it occurred to me that there are people within the U.S. government structure who aren't stupid, and especially folks that speak Arabic, like yourself and others, who know what's going on. They know what's going on, and they don't want to go along with it. And they haven't been programmed like Kamala has, and they want to stop this. Am I on to something? Do you think something like that might be taking place?
Yeah, there used to be a lot more people in the State Department and the intelligence services and the military who were dissidents. They used to call them Arabists for some time, especially in the State Department, because there were concerns from especially the neoconservatives that these people might undermine what they were attempting to accomplish. But does the name Jake Sullivan ring a bell?
No, tell me more.
Okay, Jake Sullivan, he's well known now because of a letter that he sent to, or an email, to Hillary Clinton in 2012, where Hillary had said something, well, we're fighting al-Qaeda and terrorism and all that sort of thing. And what he said, because he was part of the State Department or what, I forget. Anyway, he said very politely to her, well, you're right. I mean, in Iraq, we consider al-Qaeda to be the enemy, and they're fighting against our soldiers there. But you should know that in Syria, they're fighting on our side. Wow. That was his memo. You can find it, Jake Sullivan, to Hillary.
Well, my concern now is, I mean, there's no chance. I mean, Kamala was blown away in the presidential primary. But it looks almost inevitable at this point that Joe Biden is going to select her as his vice presidential nominee. I mean, I find it hard to think it won't happen, right? They said it was down to 3, Elizabeth Warren Amy Klobuchar, or Kamala Harris. It was down to those three. Then the protests started. And at this point, for him to not name a person of color as his vice presidential nominee is going to be very, very difficult. And especially it won't be Amy Klobuchar, because she's tied to the very police department in Minneapolis with the problem. So I'm very afraid that it appears that the American voters heard from Tulsi Gabbard what Kamala is all about. They rejected her, but they're going to sneak her back in as Joe Biden's vice presidential nominee. And we all know Joe Biden, is not firing on all cylinders, as they say, and may not last out his 4-year term. And we may end up with President Kamala Harris. I mean, do you think I'm on to something here? I mean, I feel like I have to raise the alarm about this.
Yeah, I hope a lot of other people are feeling the same thing. Kamala Harris, I mean, to some extent, Joe Biden wants someone who's not too sharp. As his running mate, and but who is corrupt, and who so it'll work for him. I don't think he really cares. The choices are being made for him, but I agree that they want to select someone that they think will do the job that is expected. The Democratic elite wants someone in there who will do as they're told and do it effectively. And I think that the correct person who is corrupt enough and who wants their support much more than she wants the American people's support is Kamala Harris.
Okay. Well, let me just ask you one last question before you go. I know your time is valuable and so is mine, but let me just ask you quickly, as someone from the Bay Area who's been following these issues and has been very politically outspoken, is there anything else about Kamala Harris that we should be aware of? Any detail that you'd like to share with us before you go?
Well, there are certain circles in which she's popular in the Bay Area, and others where she's not. And I would have to say that it's possible that she would be more popular with amongst a population that is not quite so familiar with her as we are in the Bay Area. A lot of people that I know, at least my circles, but beyond my circles, who really have misgivings about Kamala Harris, and they're concerned about the way she might abuse her office. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I don't see how any Democrat is going to lose California. I'm sorry to say that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I do want to say you look great for 74. You must be keeping in shape and exercising a lot. But keep indoors, and I hope everything goes well for you and your family amid this pandemic. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your years of activism and raising awareness.
Thank you, Caleb. Great show.
Yep, thank you.